Welcome to Fandora's Box. This is a podcast where we talk about our favorite fandoms in terms of our thoughts, theories, and opinions. We also like to do a little production analysis as well as story dissection. My name is Tyler Gardner, and I'm joined, as always, by my friend and co-host Christian Alante.
Oh, it's left to me, and now we're reviewing with the Unity Duty Destiny.
I don't want to keep that.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the next episode of fucking Bionicle.
Yes, as Christian had rapped.
Well, it's gonna be a good time. We're gonna continue from where we left off in episode 1. I'm gonna go into some of the lore, the landscape. So stick with us if you're a big Bionicle fan. We have something for you, and even if you're someone that remembers Bionicles, you're like, dude, I used to love these toys, or I used to love these games, or whatever, and I want to know more. This is also the podcast for you. So stay tuned.
So, Christian, do you think you're able to sum up a little bit of what we talked about last time?
So there was a lot last time. Unfortunately, there was also a lot of questions, which obviously we're going to be answering. But I know we went into a little bit about the. Actually, we went all the way back with the history of Bionicles and the history of Lego, kind of in general, and how Bionicles saved Lego from a $800 million depth rather, and then brought us back up to the surface and made 25% of the freaking profit, which is
100% of the profit.
100%.
Just 25% of the revenue.
Oh,
100% of the profit.
My absolute apologies.
Very important differentiation.
Bionicle hit the shelves and the kids loved it. We loved it growing up. It was great. They made video games, they made comics, they made movies, all of which are good movies. And yeah, so when we also went briefly into kind of what you would find in the Bionicle universe in terms of, kind of the good guys, the bad guys. We haven't delved too far into what each of them will kind of do and their whole import. We did a little bit, but now we're going to kind of go into. I think Tyler's going to bring us up to date with the kind of the lay of the land, as well as kind of more fine tuning of what the hell the lore is and what the giant robot is and all that shit.
Yeah. So let's jump back in. So now that you have an understanding of who kind of goes where, we're gonna talk about just like this.
Sorry, the title got me. The fucking types of fucking beings in the fucking Matoran universe.
So Matoran can be a term that's used universally. When you're speaking of the Matoran universe, you're talking about the universe that all Bionicles inhabit. You also can be talking about the Matoran as a species, and then it just seems like Matoran can be used as an interchangeable word for the people of the entire Bionicle race. You use them as like the basis for how the other organizations are set up. So essentially, I mean, I left it as like Matoran, but these different elements and different types are the same for any species. So you have your core 6 types, your core 6 elements that you first see as Toa, but that also devolves into certain evil people, so to speak, also have the same elements. But there's also these external, not quite elements, but aspects of life that are personified in different types. So like light, shadow. Oh, I forgot this one. Fey. This is iron specifically. Sonics like sound. This is psionics, mental, and then all sorts of other stuff as well. Bionicle is kind of interesting because certain elements doesn't dictate gender. So you do have male and female individuals within the universe because Bionicles don't reproduce naturally. They're created or killed. Matanui, the great beings, and like there are a couple other people that can bring about more beings in the universe. But for some reason, they still delineate like who's male, who's female.
So it's kind of like it's even less than like a core, like a plug, where it's like an outlet and a cord are considered female and male, even though in this case, I guess it's even more different because they don't really have any interactions with one another.
They do.
Well, I mean, in terms of like romantically.
Yeah, they do. They will emotionally, romantically, but obviously not physical. But it's like quite blatant, like in certain Toa teams.
I guess that makes sense because they're not going to go into the freaking talk with 12-year-olds.
No, well, I think that's why they kind of kept it pretty vanilla.
Yeah.
But like in certain stories, they do bring
it's
in
just like a sex scene in like a fucking PG movie.
But in certain books, you learn about the Toa teams and stuff like that you're reading about. But some of them do have like emotional, like deeper emotional bonds as like a girl and boy, and
Okay.
they're like, oh, I want to think of her as more than like just my co, teammate or whatever.
Got you.
For females specifically, it seems like certain types are canonically female. So water, almost anything water is always female. There are certain isolated beings of water who are male, but like if you see a toe of water, it's going to be a female.
Yeah.
Same with Matoran. Matoran are kind of interesting. They're actually you could consider them the prototype. This is a picture of them right here. They're the very first Matoran to ever been created. They were created by the Great Beings. So Matanui didn't create the Matoran. The Great Beings created. They started with the Matoran. Matoran are kind of interesting because they can be male or female. They also are the only Matoran that have powers. Like they can use like some vestiges of like light power, so to speak. And they always carry these tools that can harness this inherent power.
So to bring it back a little bit, for the original six you were talking about, which are those ones?
What do you mean?
Like, run through them real quick, because I can read that.
Yes, yes. So the first six we have Ta Matoran. Anything Ta is fire. Ga Matoran. Anything Ga is water. Li Matoran. Li is always air. Po Matoran is stone. So Po is stone.
Oh, so Liwa and Poke. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. They're exact.
I
Yep.
got the names. Yeah.
Onu Matoran is earth, and then Ko Matoran. Ko is ice.
Cool.
We have some kind of interesting isolated ones. We already spoke about light. We have Chromatorn, shadow. They don't naturally come about. This is a shadow Matorn right here, but they don't naturally come to being. They're for other types of Matoran. Doesn't have to be light. It can be any other element of Matoran, but basically just one who has been corrupted. They describe it as Matoran who's lost their light or had their light taken from them. Essentially, you can just consider them as a warped, twisted, corrupted Matoran.
Have there been any instances, either in the comics, video games, or books, where where Makuta tries to create these Shadow Matoran?
No.
Because I haven't seen them anywhere really.
No. But we're going to talk about Makuta's relationship with the Matoran and the Matoran universe later on, because that's when it starts to get kind of interesting.
It's already pretty advanced.
Yeah. We have the Saimatoran, Psionic Mental. They're always female, and then the Vomatoran of Lightning. They're always female.
Interesting.
So we know the who, now the where. The story of Bionicle encompasses a lot of different lands.
Mm.
So you learn about isolated lands, but then you kind of learn how they're all connected. So what Christian, or where Christian was speaking of earlier, was Motunui. Motunui is the island home of the Matoran and the Turaga first, in the middle of this huge ocean. They discovered this island, they named it Motunui after Motunui. Later on,
It's also where the wonderful Mask of Light movie takes place.
Yes.
For those listening, go watch that. If there's anything you get out of our Bionicle one, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
This is where the Toamata float to shore. They float to shore in their little canisters, and they eventually learn of this island and its people. They learn that the Makuta is also here as well. He's been harassing the Matoran and the Turaga for about 1,000 years by the time our first Toa show. The second location that we learn of is Metronui. Metronui is a city through and through, considered like New York City, but like on fucking steroids.
Hence the Metro.
Yep, this is where we meet our second generation of heroes, the Toa Metru. Yeah, and then it's in the center. Metro Nui has this kind of really cool central hub called the Coliseum. That's essentially where.
I know they travel through like tubes and stuff.
Yes,
So
yeah.
it's like Coruscant in Star Wars, but just made into this really kind of functional alternate one for robots, essentially.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that actually. So going back to like with Montanui, Metro Nui, I think with Voya Nui, and then planets Bara Magna, as you see below. I'm not so sure about these two, but we'll talk about those later. But for most instances, every land that you visit is divided by the six original elements of fire, water, ice, earth, stone, and air. The inhabitants of those certain sections are the ones that are akin to that element. So with Montanui, it's tropical, primal, nowhere near. I mean, there's no technological advancements at all whatsoever on this island at all. Metro Nui is the complete opposite. It's a fully functioning, hyper advanced civilization, a city. As Christian was speaking to, they not only do they travel through these chutes, But they also what they use those chutes for is to transport goods from each section of Metro Nui. So each section of Metro Nui is they have a different task to fulfill. So like Ga Metro is full of the Ga Matoran. They're chroniclers. They have museums. They're teachers. They also harvest the protodermis from the water, and they send it to different areas of the city. Tom Metru will take the protodermis. They'll make masks. They'll make tools. They'll make discs. They'll make all sorts of things.
Forge.
Yep. Yeah. The forge of Tom Metru is a huge, huge forge. Lee Metru is kind of weird. They do a lot of different things. They create vehicles, so like airships, land vehicles, all sorts of things. But they're also where the you can kind of see it here. I guess you can't do it. Lee Metro is the hub for where all those different transport chutes start, and they control the chutes throughout the metros. Co Metro is kind of crazy.
Is Co Earth or Stone?
Co is ice.
Co is ice.
Co is ice.
Oh,
Yeah.
it looked black. Sorry.
Yeah, it's like a.
It is a small image on the screen.
But Comatorns are hysterical. They're super introverts to the point where like you could walk into a room with a bunch of them and they'll just act like you're not there unless you like walk up and like grab one of them. Like hey, like they'll just actively ignore your presence. They're so funny.
I see. It's kind of like Kopaka.
Yeah. Oh, but way to an extreme. Like they're not. Like Aka's just downright rude.
Yeah, he's sassy.
Yeah, he's just a douchebag. But Comatorns are just like they just want to be left alone. They spend a lot of time studying the heavens to like learn about destinies. They learn about prophecies. They also have these crazy structures called knowledge towers, which house all the knowledge. They like build it into the tower itself. Yeah.
Knowledge.
Onumetru is weird. I'm not sure what Onumetru does on the surface.
They just hang out.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. The only thing I can think of is that they have surface like workers to interact with the other areas, the other sections. But for the most part, Onimetru takes place underground, like any other Onu village. But with Onimetru specifically, they house something which is called the archives. The archives are like the library of Wong Shitong and Daedalus's Labyrinth put together. It's insane. It houses every copy of not copy, but it houses a specimen of like every plant, every being, every animal that you can think of.
I wonder if that's why it's right next to Kometru, because they have their neighbors.
And then Pometru are builders, carvers. They kind of butt heads with people from Talmetru, but they don't build things like tower or tools and stuff like that. They'll build statues. They'll build houses. They'll take the raw material from Gametru and they'll refine it as well. That's what a lot of the stuff that they do. But then they'll also have their own dedicated, like detailed artists. The reason I specified that stuff for Metro Nui was because they're the only land that we know of that there are specified jobs per section of the world of the land. Everything else, there just seems to be sort of this cohabitation going on, and everybody's just separated by their natural element.
This is just an aside for you, though. Is this where you kind of got the idea for your D&D campaign?
What's that?
Like each region has their own task.
And maybe like subliminally, but no.
You got like the mine town, you have all this stuff. So like, I wonder.
Well, that was more
nice,
just
nice and spread out.
That was more just. I did separate everything to make it a reason why you'd have to go to like these different areas. But yeah,
that'd be kind of cool. The Metro Nui style map.
That'd be really cool. The third location that we're introduced to is an island called Voya Nui.
This is past my expertise right here.
Well, so this is actually where that last game, the game that you played on PS2, this is where that takes place.
Oh, yeah.
Voya Nui is interesting for a couple different reasons. The first reason is because it is the first land that we are introduced to that is already kind of corrupted, already has evil going on before our heroes get there. So Matanui's pretty tame, pretty, we'll say, nice and good until the Toa arrive, and then they learn about their enemy, and then you find conflict. Metro Nui is completely fine when we first learn about it, and then evil seeps in. Voya Nui, by the time our heroes, a couple different generations show up in this island, but by the time we get there, it is already taken over by the Paraka, who we learned about before. These guys are in control of Voya Nui.
Isn't that who you play as in Voya Nui? Or in that PS2 game?
I don't know if you could do both. I know you play as the Toa. but I'm not
Mm.
sure if you the Paraka. I believe are your enemies. I'm not sure in some cases you fight or can play as the Paraka. I only played
Yeah,
the DS version,
it's
so it's a
it's an
little different.
obscure one. Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
figure that out.
but basically what the Paraka did was they came across this island, Voya Nui. They told the Matoran that were there, told them and tricked them into thinking they were Tella because
Mm.
they looked like Tella, and not really, but they kind of like embodied or could. So they're just like, no,
Yeah,
yeah,
they got the elements
yeah,
involved.
we're Tella, but they act like douchebags. Voya Nui has a really important artifact on it called the Mask of Life, which is why the Paraka there to begin with. The Voya Nui is also connected to the next location, Mari Nui. So you see this area right here?
Yeah, the little gulf
Mari Nui used to be here. Mari Nui and Voya Nui used to be one location.
until
But
it hit its Atlantis arc.
yeah, there was a crazy event that happened that actually broke it apart, and Mari Nui sank to the bottom of the ocean, or not to the bottom, it sank down below. And the only thing that's connecting them, and you can kind of see it here, but this little stone tunnel called the cord. It connects. There's access from somewhere in Voya Nui that can lead you right down if you don't
So
decide to
Tyler is
jump.
describing as a basically this underwater looking city or civilization with a large what
Mm-hmm.
looks like a mountain, which I guess is used as a well, you said it was a core.
Yeah, so it only looks kind of mountainous at the very bottom. Once you stretch it out, this turns into just like one cylindrical stone strand
Gotcha.
that connects right back up to around here.
Like a follicle.
But yeah, as Christian was saying, Mari Nui sank below the water from Voya Nui. There were still inhabitants on the land when it sank. So what they ended up having to do was to survive was they created these little air bubble things, like they harvested the oxygen from the water to surround their civilization.
Do they need to breathe?
Yes. Hmm.
Oh,
Yep. They do need to breathe.
I never thought of a Bionicle being capable of suffocation.
Bionicle are biomechanical beings, so they have
Oh,
some
okay.
organic parts, some mechanical parts.
Understood.
But like I guess like their innards are fully organic. So like they need to breathe. I guess they can also eat too. You don't super see them eating them,
No,
but I guess they can
must be
eat
tough
like
eating
berries and stuff.
with the mask on.
Well,
I know they
the
usually they have
mask,
the mouthful.
yeah, the
Yeah,
mask,
okay,
yeah, the
that's
mask. Well, like I'm not sure how that works exactly, but the masks like seem to like open and close with
I
their
don't think. I think that was it was probably intentionally overlooked because they probably didn't want the kids to be bogged down with
yeah
the
the
details of
minutia.
the day to day eating habits of the.
No, yeah, no, we're doing action. Yeah, nobody gives a shit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Marinu is also kind of interesting because there's no real subsection between the elements like we see in other lands, and they also don't really have a Taraga leader. So like Motunui has the six Taraga that leads their own separate villages and they have their own
Hmm.
council. Metro Nui is run by one Taraga, Taraga Duma. Voyanui, I believe, had Taraga before the Barak got there, but I'm not certain.
So
Um,
it's kind of like what would happen if the Matoran people just ran an area essentially.
Yeah, I mean, Matoran are they're not idiots. They're not kids, even though
Yeah,
they
yeah,
can look as kids. Like they're working. I want to say adults, so to speak.
yeah, yeah.
But they know what to
It's
do.
not their first rodeo.
No, like in this case, they have. I think they have like a Matoran counselor or some shit that like runs things, like operates the day to day.
Kind of like a mayor,
Yeah, I'm not sure if there was like one being, but we'll talk about that later. The second to last location
which
we're
I have
introduced to.
not seen in the slightest.
No, very few have, even within the universe, and there's a specific reason. But I think I might have spelled that wrong. I think it's
It's
Cardi.
Cardi B Nui.
I think it's Cardinui, but that's okay. Anyways, Cardinui. This is the last location. Cardinui is split into two biomes almost. So like on the bottom, you can't see it in this picture, but there's all swamp underneath on the
Yeah.
bottom.
So what would you describe this as like a spire tower going into kind of the sky right here?
This isn't all of it. This is just like one part.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like there's an above and there's a below. So the below of
Below water level?
below like underneath this and like underneath the
Oh, underneath
above.
the imagery? Yeah.
Yeah, underneath the imagery, there's a swamp,
Oh,
and then
okay.
above here is like this sky in the sky civilization, like winged. I mean, the people in the swamp can fly too, but they kind of stick to their area. But then you have the people above here that can like fully fly.
Yeah, it's like two spiked club mountains kind of up and down. It's
Mhm.
crazy.
The last location that we're introduced to, or the last two locations that we're introduced to, are actually two separate planets. The first location, the first location that you learn of is a planet called Bara Magna. Barra Magna is really harsh, almost fully desert. It is bisected or dissected like each individual section per element, just like the other lands from before. But there really isn't much going on, and we don't really learn too much about Barra Magna until the fruition of the story later on.
Do the planets have any ability to connect to one another, or are they oblivious to each other's existence?
We'll go into it.
Damn it.
The one of the other planets that we are introduced to is Aqua Magna. Aqua Magna is like almost fully water, and we'll get into that too. But this is so fucking frustrating. Our timelines, we shall say our present day story when we're first introduced to the Toamata takes place on Aqua Magna.
That was all the 7 places.
And I was actually going to try and keep this secret from you until like later on, but I realized I couldn't. It wouldn't make sense. All of the lands that you saw before
Yeah.
are actually within a giant robot
Yes.
inside the Mountain robot.
Yeah, that's one of the only things that I did understand from the last movie.
But the problem was nobody really learned about it until that last movie.
Yeah.
But the robot was supposedly there
the whole time, yeah.
From the get
From the jump.
So Montanui, while he was inside of his giant robot form, crashed onto Aqua Magna and sank to the bottom of the ocean. So the planet or the island that we see, Montanui, actually formed right above his face. So Montanui's robot face is right below this island.
And they really put his head in the game.
And then and then Voya Nui actually broke out from the robot too and floated to the surface. And then Mari Nui broke apart from Voya Nui, and Mari Nui is actually on the top of the robot as well. So these 3 lands are separate from the robot. The other 2 lands, Metro Nui, that's still inside the robot. Carta Nui is still inside the robot as well. And then...
But they're on the surface, though.
No, they're still inside the robot.
Oh, so they're biomes in the giant robot?
Yeah.
Yep. Fucking massive ass robot.
These short of Matanui, because that was always external.
So wait, what the fuck? How the fuck did they get from Metro Nui to Matanui? I know you're gonna answer it. I'm just mad that I don't know.
Yeah, it's yeah, it's crazy.
Well, none of us. These are making more questions than answers.
None of us knew for the longest time because how they wrote it was like they went through this tunnel to Metro New. I'm like, where was that tunnel? What do you mean? They just like it was just there. We got nothing. We got nothing for like 9 years.
That's hilarious.
Fucking insane. Yeah. The robot of Matsui crashed on Aqua Magna.
Gotcha.
This island, I guess, was created because it was a malfunction of Matanui's camouflage function, which was like in case the robot had to like be dormant for a little while or like was going to be in an area for a while, it could disguise itself as not being a robot. And I guess this island was part of that function.
That function just kind of became permanent.
Well, there's a reason for all of that, and we should get into that. And here you can see more of a breakdown. Metro Nui is essentially Matanui's robot brain, which is why it was so important for all of the functions that were going on within the city. Voya Nui used to be located in this section. Looks like maybe like right here. But when he crashed, Voya Nui actually floated above to the surface.
Voya Nui is a lot bigger than Metro or Matanui.
Yeah, Matanui and Voya Nui were both on the surface. You couldn't see each other, but they were both. You could technically sail to Voya Nui and Matanui.
This is one of the reasons why I'm sad that the Bionicle series is kind of ended.
Yeah,
because there's so much of this robot that is on the surface that no one's really gone into. Or
well, they talk about a lot of these different lands that you see, but they didn't play. The story only evolved.
Like Southern Islands apparently has no details in the slightest for the most part.
Yeah, but like the story only revolves around these sections, but there's so many other things that are mentioned throughout the stories. You kind of learn a little bit about what they do and what purpose they served, but there's not too much more that's going on. So let's do we'll say one of our timelines.
We'll answer some of our questions.
So you know how like Star Wars has ABY, BBY for like after battle Yavin, for battle Yavin?
Yeah, timeline markers.
Yeah. Bionicle never really had a timeline marker like that.
Like so?
Kind of. It only spoken like, oh, this many years ago this happened. But there are certain definitive points within the Bionicle timelines, just to kind of give us an
You can
idea.
string them together.
Yeah, to give us an idea. So I created AMN, which means just after Matanui, which is after the creation of Matanui, the robot, not the island.
Nice. For those of us listening, let's make Tyler's abbreviation canon. We'll just call it AMN now. You'll be the innovator, my friend.
Cool. So even before Matanui was in existence, there were these beings called the Great Beings. They were inventors, creators, ultimately powerful beings that just did whatever the fuck they want. They resided on a planet called Spherus Magna. They did all sorts of what?
I just saw the picture. This is the
Fuck. I
you
know.
put so much fucking effort into this, man. It's crazy. I appreciate it.
So the Great Beings resided on a planet called Spherus Magna. Not too much of import there, simply the name. They were doing all sorts of stuff, but they were experimenting with wanting to know what was going on in the inside of the greater galaxy. So they created the robot Montanui. He actually was not the first. There were multiple prototype robots. One that actually kind of exploded, went all over the planet. And then what happened was there was this event called the Shattering, which there was this substance, I believe it was the energized protodermis, started to actually bubble up from the core of Spherus Magna. And the different people living on Spherus Magna came across this stuff and they realized it was super powerful. It could transform weapons, it could create things, it did all sorts of stuff. So, of course, like anything else, people started fighting over it. So, there's this thing called the Core War, or core wars that were going on. The Great Beings tried to stay out from it. They tried to just let everybody else do their own thing, but the Great Beings were still experimenting with the protodermis and they were doing their own stuff on top, including creating Matanui. So they created Matanui, they created the Matoran, and they created a couple of other individuals as well, specific individuals that were essentially running the Matoran universe until Matanui came into being.
Hmm.
Then this instance called the Shattering happened, where the planet of Spherus Magna broke apart. It didn't break apart in kind of a clean physical way like other things. It was really weird. It broke apart in three sections. The main part, which we know of, Bar Magna, which is just the desert, like barren wasteland of a planet. And then the two other planets that were created, one was called Agua Magna, and the other one was called Bota Magna. It was almost like these separate planets are like the essence of the original planet. So Aqua Magna took almost all of the water out of the planet Spherus Magna and created its own planet that was just completely water. Then the Bota Magna took like the plant life and the fauna life from Spherus Magna and created a separate planet called Bota Magna on the side. So this shattering was also one of the reasons why Matsunui was tasked with leaving the planet. They wanted to figure out a way to get the planet back together, and they just didn't have enough information. So they wanted to see if there was other information out in the galaxy that could help them get the planet back together. So that was why the Great Spirit Matanui went off and did his things. We're gonna go 100,000 AMN after the creation of Matanui as sort of our definitive timeline marker. So Matsunu is created. The Matoran universe is created inside of him by the great beings. It's already kind of pre-populated before Matanui showed up. Matanui actually took over from somebody else who was running the universe prior to him, the universe being his body. And then what the first things that Matanui does is he creates the Makuta species. He creates the Makuta species to develop the fauna, the animal, and the plant life of his universe and to populate it that way. They're also utilized as not quite police, but they're also enforcers of his will. So Makuta started off as good.
And this is what 100,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
From present day being the very first product that you pick up off the shelves.
Right.
95,000 AMN.
So 5,000 years later.
5,000 years later, Matanui creates six separate species. He picked a leader for each species, the Baraki, which we talked about before,
Right.
and then he divided portions of the universe to provide land for each species. We're not certain what area of the universe, where like the divisions start with like each of the six separate species.
Mm.
Other people have created like fan-made maps, but there's no canonical information to back them up. So take it as you will.
Gotcha.
15,000 years later, the Baraki actually conquered most of the Matoran universe, and they're planning on overthrowing Matanui as the ruler of the universe.
Hmm.
This ended up a massive conflict, a combined army of Toa and Makuta defeating the Baraki's armies, and then they banished the Baraki to this area called the Pit.
It's just his ass.
No, it's not his ass.
It's true though. It is kind of interesting that they would have to have been somewhere on his
Yeah,
life form.
yeah, on his being that they were put to.
Interesting.
500 years later, there was a Matoran civil war that broke out in Metru Nui, which put Matanui's life in serious danger because the Matoran were actually doing the work that kept him alive. So during this war, they stopped doing that work, so essentially his bodily functions were not happening.
Right, right.
So he started to die,
His
actually.
circulation was cutting
Yeah,
off.
things like that, yeah. So the brain essentially wasn't telling the rest of the body what to do because the brain was in war with itself.
Kind of the wow, that's kind of an interesting look of things because it's like you have the blessings of being this massive, super technical robot. You
Mhm.
know, that's this great being, but you have the kind of Achilles heel where like your benevolence with these people can turn on its head, and you
Yeah,
can be suddenly the one in danger.
so Matanui's function was to provide aspects of any sentient life that they would need, like the forces of gravity, of light, of oxygen. He produced that and he brought that into the universe, but he needed the Matoran and everybody else to do everything else that a body would need. Like exactly like circulate his blood,
Hmm.
move his thoughts, send his commands out to different which actually was shown as like a physical aspect of like the information, like
It's
the
kind of like
neurons
if
firing.
your red blood cells started fighting each
If
other.
they have, yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yep.
it's kind of terrifying.
It's a crazy concept. The Makuta ended up coming in, ended the Matoran Civil War, and then a team of Toa were dispatched to do a sort of separate mission to heal and bring Matanui back to full life. We'll talk about that later on.
Hmm.
A lot of other events happen, but there's no time points given to any of those other events.
Oh wow!
So
So
I
this is
cut ahead way, way far ahead.
wow, 70, almost 78,000 years
Yeah,
later.
almost 80,000 years later.
It's incredible.
Between this event and the kind of 1,000 years before present day,
Hmm.
Matsu or the Makuta start to get some ideas to like take over the world too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But by 1,000 years after Matanui, Makuta infected Matanui with a virus that caused him to fall into a coma. Matanui crashes into the surface of Aqua
Oh, that's
Magna,
right. He's
sank
technically
into
not
the
dead.
water. So that's what happens 1,000 years before our first heroes arrive.
So in that movie, you see that big old crash or whatever it is.
You never see the
Oh,
crash.
you never see the crash,
You
but
see the
it's
awakening actually of when he
yeah.
becomes awake.
Mm.
But they're on the surface of Aqua Magna, or they're in the ocean of Aqua Magna.
Yeah, he basically face plants into a planet.
It isn't faceplant. He lands on his back actually, and then the island covers his face.
Oh my god.
Facing, yeah.
I didn't realize that.
There's talk that there's actually some functions in the robot, like fail-safe functions, where
Yeah.
in case something like that would happen, he would
We'll
land
fall on his back.
face up. Yeah,
Learning
but
more as I go.
that I'm not sure that's been canonized either.
Yeah, it's
But
kind of
regardless,
theory.
our main story, present day, begins with Matanui being asleep for the last 1,000 years underneath the oceans of Aqua Magna, with the island of Matanui above his face, which has been considered some sort of malfunction of his camouflage, one of his camouflage protocols that created this weird island above his head. So this is why I created sort of these separate stories because you're introduced to one story. You're not told of all this other stuff that had gone on. You're not even told of all the other stuff that has been going on. And even then, you're only learn about it kind of interjectingly. The main story that I have over here has
Okay.
to do with the quest to save Matanui. Yeah. So the main story involves every generation of hero saving Matanui. Well, I should say almost every generation of Matanui saving, or every generation of hero saving Matanui.
Mm.
So you have the first generation, the Toamata. Now, the thing with the Bionicle product and the story is that each generation actually survives two product cycles, and what they do is they evolve or change the original heroes in some way. And they kind of,
What do you mean by
I'll show you
that?
actually.
Like, are they the same model or?
I'll actually show you in physical person.
Okay.
So you have the first generation Telemata during the second, not second generation, but the second rendition of their product. They are evolved to become the
Yeah,
Telenula.
I think I had that guy.
Yep, but they're the same character, just a little more evolved, more powerful, have greater armor. Not every single generation of Toa evolves into like we'll say a more powerful version. In some instances, they're just simply changed to meet the needs of the story and their environment. We'll go into that a little later. Gen 1, you see on the island of Matanui, and we're following the same, we'll say the main story to save Motunui. They go from the island of Motunui, the same generation, then they travel to Metronui, the city. The next location, the next generation we meet is actually it is the third generation of Toa that we are released as product, but they fall right after this generation and they show up on Voya Nui. Those same Toa then evolve or change when they travel down to Mari Nui. They evolve mostly because they need to be able to survive underwater, and there's a reason why they're changed. Then, near the wrapping up of the story, we come back to our first generation of Toa, but they've changed yet again when they're inside a different land. So it's the original Toa from the very, very beginning, but now they're near the end of the story and they're different forms.
So it's OGs with the change, then Gen 3, Gen 3's with the change, and then we finally circle back to Gen 1.
Yep. And then by the culmination of the story, every generation of the different Toa and Bionicle, they all get together on Bar Magna, Sirius Magna for like the all out duking of like every single bad guy versus good guy kind of thing.
Yeah, sure.
So we talked a little bit about what went on before, but this is more of like this time right here is just before Masanui gets put to sleep. You learn about these events when the second generation of Toa show up to Toa Metru, but it's kind of confusing because even though you're introducing them as new Toa, they're actually the Draga that you already met before, and this story happened 1,000 years before you're even introduced to these characters. Their story takes place within inside the city of Metronui, which we know is the brain of Matanui Robot. So, right after he falls asleep, they escape Metronui, they discover the island above, and they name it Matanui. The problem was the only people that escaped were the six Toa. They needed to go back and get them torn. So then those same Toa, we'll call them Gen 2, they head back to Metronui, rescue all the Matoran. Toa Metro encounter spiders, the Viscerac. They're transformed, they're mutated into Toa Hordica, but then they eventually manage to defeat the Viscerac, rescue the Matoran, and get back to Matanui. The main Makuta
Now the
Makuta.
Viscerac now considered Gen 3.
Well, the Viscerac.
Sorry, Toa or Deep.
No, because they're the same as the Toa Metro.
So
It's like those guys. The
so
same Toa, just
that's
changed.
the alteration.
Yeah, it's the same generation of Toa, just changed.
Holy shit! This
Yeah.
is a lot. This is the hardest part of this whole thing.
Yeah, yep. It's gonna get. This is gonna be just like this is your appetizer.
This is what we call the kitchen sink side.
Yeah. As we do more episodes, we're gonna do deep dives, and eventually, by the end of it, we'll say maybe 2 years from now, you'll have a great full understanding of everything. The Toa, as the Hordika, fight the Viscerac, defeat them, rescue the Torin, bring them all back to the island that we started.
Gotcha.
The main evil guy, Makuta, Pterodax, he follows them to their island and just kind of begins harassing them for the next 1,000 years.
You guys suck.
Before any of that, going back to the stuff that we talked about, there's all this internal stuff going on inside the robot. So we already knew about this. We called it 80,000 years, 20,000 years after Matsunui was created. The Makuta and Toa defeat the Baraki and throw them into the pit, exile. This instance is where the Makuta as a species kind of start to get ideas to take over Matanui. They're kind of fed up with being like doing all of this work. They're not recognized in a lot of instances, even though Matanui created them and Matanui consider the Makuta his brothers, they're not treated the same. So, like the Matoran, they love Matanui. They adore him. They fully believe him. Like he's the best. They build temples. They build statues. They do all this sorts of like worship and adoration towards Matanui. They don't give a flying fuck about the Makuta whatsoever. So the Makuta are like, hey, you know what? Fuck it. Why don't we just like rule? Pterodax himself mentioned specifically that he wanted to humble Montanui. He didn't want to like just straight up kill him, but he wanted to like let's put him in his place. What is he really doing? Not a lot.
That's interesting because they're living on him.
A lot of them don't realize it. Almost all of them do not realize what's going on.
Oh.
What happened was Pterodax takes control of the Brotherhood of the Makuta because they're all Makuta are like, yeah, we want to do this, and Pterodax is like, yeah, but I know how to do it. And then he eventually takes over. He kicks out the other leader. His name was Miserex. He sends a specific Makuta named Mutron. He sends Mutron to this being called Tren Chrome. Tren Chrome is I think he's one of the most interesting guys in this entire universe. He was the guy who was ruling the robot and running the robot before Matanui existed. Even that he knew when he was put there and he was told that his job was finite, like he had like an end date, like a punch out time. He was still kept in the universe, which I think was the dumbest mistake. But he was exiled to like some far off land. He was really weird because he's the only being that's 100% fully organic.
Hmm.
All the other every other
So he was
species,
he was entirely flesh and blood.
yeah. And like he basically, what happened was, if anybody saw him, they would pretty much just go insane, just because of like how otherworldly he looked. He was actually based
Hmm.
on like Cthulhu myths and shit like that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, in our world, that's how his.
So like the Matoran view him as basically like the great old one, kind of.
Most of them don't even really know he exists.
Hmm.
Very few people know they existed. But Makuta, because of how old they were, and Makuta Tiridax knew that he existed. So he sent one of his agents out. The dude almost went insane, but then Trenchrome kind of takes over and like sort of like explores his mind. Essentially, what Tiridax wanted to learn was he wanted to learn about Matanui, like who he is, what he is, where he is. That's when Kuda finds out about the big ass robot, and he finds out how he functions, and he finds out what role
Wait, the
Matanui
big
plays.
ass robot is
Yeah,
Matanui.
yeah. And he goes, "Oh, cool. So now with this information, I now know how we can take him out. Because if he killed Matanui, he could potentially kill the world. So he doesn't necessarily want to kill Matanui. He want to get him to a very vulnerable point so that he could actually take over the physical body.
Hmm.
So that when he finds this out, this is when he develops his plan to put Matanui to sleep, to essentially take him out of the game.
It's like I want to kill the world. Oh wait, I can't kill the
He
world.
never
I want to rule the
he
world.
never wanted to kill. He never wanted to kill. He wanted to humble Masamune. He never wanted to kill. He wanted to take over from him. But he didn't know exactly how to go about that
Hmm.
because he didn't know too much about it. And then we found out, he goes, "Fucking even better."
Humble is also kind of a vague terminology.
Well, I mean, you could humble somebody by killing them, sure, I guess, but humble somebody by like step over them, put them in their place, kind of, so to speak. He didn't like how he never saw what Matanui was actually doing to influence the world, so he never really understood why everybody had like this adoration, because he only saw it as, well, we're the ones fucking doing all the work. Why are you taking all the credit?
Mm.
He saw how close the Baraki got to actually conquering, and they said, "Oh shit! So he can actually be overthrown. He is conquerable. He's not omnipotent. He's not omniscient. We can do this." And like, who better to rule than us, the fucking guys who created all the other life, short of the Torn, but all the other life within the universe. We're the guys who we're basically like ruling in place of Matanui already. So he develops his own plan to put him to sleep. Around this time, or a little bit, yeah, around this time too, a specific team of Toa called the Toahaga, they're assigned to Pterodax. Once Makuta takes over, he actually assigns Toa to certain specific Makuta species, certain members. So this specifically was his team. They guard and protect and do whatever. Well, the Toa,
So kind of like the mirror Toa,
what's that?
the mirror Toa,
Mirror Toa?
like not the ones defending the Matoran, but the ones defending the Makuta.
Yes and no, yeah. I mean, they all know their place, but essentially, like the Toa will do as they're told. Like they're the soldiers, if you so to speak. So they'll do whatever. But this group is very important because they discover Pterodax's plans. So they're like, oh shit. So they don't even like really plan it out. They don't wait. They basically just surprise attack his fucking fortress, and they get pretty fucking far. They know part of his plan has to do with something, the Mask of Light, which we know about from the movie. So they break into his castle, beat the shit out of him, steal the Mask of Light, but they're mutated on their way out of the castle. But they still managed to. They were successful. They got the Mask of Light. They hid it in some far off land.
So his guards jump him.
Like, yeah, well, they don't even like jump him. They weren't there in his fortress, so they assaulted the fortress, got in, beat the shit out of whoever was in front of them, almost beat the shit out of Makuta.
When they were assigned as guards, but they weren't in his fortress.
No, not like 100%. They're not like Secret Service, so to speak.
Oh.
They're more just like to do whatever. Like if he had to go like travel or whatever, like they'd be there, so to speak. But at that point, they weren't there. Because Toa like reside wherever. I'm not sure if the Toa had like a specific like area that they would like inhabit when they weren't on duty, so to speak. Regardless, that's what happens. They managed to steal the Mask of Light, which was important. That did hinder Makuta, but they were mutated during their escape, and they show up later on in the story. They're actually these warped. They show up in the third movie with the spiders. They have the Rahaga, the weird little rock Rahaga looking things. Those are the old Toahaga from before.
And this is about 1,300 years before
Everything goes down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
1001 years before Matanui or before present day, 1 year before Matanui falls asleep. Pterodax takes control of Metro Nui, which obviously is the most important part. That's his
The
brain.
brain.
He takes it apart. He goes in disguise as Turagaduma, who was originally Turagaduma was a real person.
Mm.
Turagaduma was like the benevolent like Turaga leader of Metro Nui. Makuta disguises himself as him, takes control of that, and then he knows what he's going to do, so he puts all the Matoran into these pods and puts them asleep for a little while and like secures them away because he knows what's going to happen. So he does this, he takes control, but at the same time, Matanui, who kind of knew what the Makuta were going to be up to, created some events, and he worked with his order, the Order of Matanui, to put all these other events into play that weren't going to stop him because they didn't know exactly what he was going to be up to, but they knew at the very least we were going to have some way to save Matanui after shit goes hits the fan. So one of the things they did was they created the Destined Toa, the Toa Metru, Makuta had actually discovered who were going to be the Toa, or he knew that Toa were going to be created because at this point he had killed off. There were hundreds of Toa in Metro Nui, but he sent them off. He had them killed, and then he closed all the gates to Metro Nui so that nobody else could get in. But then what he also did was he had a Dark Hunter. I can't remember which one, but he had a Dark Hunter on the outside of the gates who would essentially kill anybody who left. So there was no way in or out, and there was no new information going into Metro Nui short of like what was needed for the robot survival. Then he thought, okay, well, because almost all the Toa are gone, they're going to try and create more. So he tried to find records of what Matoran were destined to become Toa. Well, what had happened was Matanui, while working with the Order of Matanui, forged fake prophecies, and they gave them to Makuta. Said, or they allowed Makuta to find these fake prophecies. So Makuta finds out who he thinks are supposed to become Toa. So he tried to influence different Toa to become Toa, or a different Matoran to become Toa. What ended up happening was the Matoran that he influenced were the ones that were supposed to be Toa all along.
Fuck. So
Yeah.
wait, how the hell did the other people fuck that up?
So a lot of what goes on with the Destiny is a really big thing with the Bionicle storyline,
Yeah.
Bionicle universe. There, what at one point, that's why like a lot of Matoran, like the Comatorans, they'll read the stars to like figure out what's going to happen in the future. But one of the big things is the creation of Toa. Short of like Toa, the Toa Mata, and the very first Toa, all Toa came from Matoran. So certain Matoran were destined to become Toa. In our instance, there were specific Matoran who were destined to become the new Toa Netru. Okay? That had already been predetermined however many thousands of years ago. Well, Makuta knew this. He said, well, there's got to be records somewhere showing who's going to become Toa, right? Well, Montanui at this point knew at the very least we're going to protect the future generation of Toa. So they created a fake prophecy because Makuta wanted to find out who it was, and then he wanted to influence different Matoran to become Toa. So that way, technically, the wrong Matoran, like we'll say, ones that couldn't work together, that were incompatible, that didn't have the right mindset or attitude to become Toa, they would become Toa, which would be wrong, and they would fuck everything up. Which is what he wanted, because he didn't want, he didn't want heroes out there that could mess with his plans. So Montanui, they falsified prophecies. They said, oh, okay, John, Dave, Christian, and Tyler, blah blah. They wrote down like they're gonna become the Toa, and then they like hid them in like some temple somewhere. Well, Makuta comes across and goes, "Oh, okay, so John, Dave, and so are gonna become Toa, even though they were never gonna become the Toa to begin with." So he goes, "Well, what if these guys became Toa? Bakama, Nokama, Mata. What if they became Toa?" Well, it turns out Bakama, Nakama, Mata, they were supposed to become the Toas to begin with. So he influenced the correct Toa, thinking he was influencing the wrong Toa or wrong Matoran to become Toa. Does that make sense?
Yes.
We'll go into it during a deep dive, but
Okay.
that was one of the biggest impacts of like the heroes. That was like the biggest win for the heroes at this point because it was still gonna the shit was still gonna hit the fan. This was essentially they were preparing for like the fallout essentially. How we're gonna get back, how we're gonna save Matanui because he's already fucked.
Right.
So 1,000 years after he's created, Pterodax infects Matanui with a virus, puts him to sleep. He has all the Torrens secured away because he knows once he goes to sleep, you have to understand this robot's in the middle of a flight while he gets put to sleep. So it just crashes right into Aquamagna, goes right into the waves. This is where this happens. So as soon as everything crashes, the second movie happens just before the crash, and then the events that happen directly after, which is the Toa Metru's attempt to stop Makuta, save him Torn, and then he fails. In the third movie, they come back, fight the spiders, save Notorin, go back to their island home on Matanui. We still have about 1,000 years before our main storyline, which is the rescue of Matanui, which is every subsequent generation of Toa. I want to say from 2005, 2006 onwards. All of that is technically present day or has yet to happen. This has already happened. This has already happened. But when you first get a product that came out on the shelf in 2001, there's a whole story that was actually already going on before those products even hit the shelf. But you don't find out until like in these weird, like disconnected, disjointed ways. That's why it got kind of confusing for people because there was not a linear progression of the story. It started out a little bit like how you have the original trilogy, they're technically the sequels. Then you have the prequels. It was kind of like that first, but then it got even more worked because they brought in all this other shit that was going on too. So those are the three, I would say, main storylines for the entirety of the Bionicle canon. We're gonna do deep dives later on, but there are some other important things I think you should know about before we do any further deep dives. Masks. Masks are a huge component of the Bionicle storyline, or these are what drive the
Does that
story.
say Kahoni?
Kanohi.
No, I thought it said you
Cojones?
don't have the cojones.
No, absolutely not. Can't imagine nobody would call it that in 20 years.
Bionicle
Kanohi.
cojones.
Kanohi. Actually, Kanohi is a Maori word.
That would
Means
be
face.
hilarious.
Well,
If it like a commercial, it's just like, "Hey kids, do you have the cojones to get, to get the new Bionicle
collect
set?"
all the cojones and save the world. Wait, we have to understand. Actually, in 2001, 2002,
Yeah.
the Lego company was sued by the Maori people,
Oh, really?
because they used a ton of their language, just took their words and just used it. Like they took Toa, which means warrior. I think they took Matoran, and they took about 30 or 40 other words.
Is it? Well, can it be copyrighted?
Well, that was the
Can it
thing.
be a language?
That was Labour's argument. It's like, well, we weren't using this in any weird way. We weren't changing the meaning. We took the words and used them for exactly what they meant.
We weren't using your words. We're using the words.
And exactly, it's like it's like also you don't have a copyright on a language.
Yeah.
Lego did say
Those are the actual
Lego did
words.
say moving forward after that lawsuit, they said, fine, we're not gonna use any more of your fucking words, but we're not gonna change all the other fucking names and shit that we
Yeah.
already had going in.
Yeah.
That was their lawsuit. They tried to have they didn't have a case, but
Yeah.
Lego was like, all right, get it.
But yeah, there's some drama there. Yeah.
A little bit of drama. Yeah. So the masks in Bionicle World called Kanohi were an element that originated with the boneheads of Voodoo Island. The masks were
Now that probably won't be able to come back.
no. The whole thing with Boneheads was it was centered completely around the masks of all different power and like you had to collect them. But with Bionicle, it became a smaller part of the universe, but the mask turned into a huge thing for collectors for the actual physical sets because essentially each version of the mask you could find, and every character could use mask interchangeably, which was really
Yeah,
cool.
that was always one of the cool parts because sometimes you would lose the masks because they were just little parts.
Mm-hmm.
So like having a bunch of masks were always cool because you could change up whatever character you wanted to be playing with or whatever.
Mm.
And in the most rudimentary sense.
Yeah, and masks are what actually drove the canonical story in a couple different ways. Before we get too much into that, where else do you see masks? Well, you see masks everywhere. Every single character, I should say, almost every single character in the Bionicle universe wears a mask. They're actually required. So, for some beings like Matoran, if they don't have a mask, they will get weaker and weaker. Then they will fall into a coma, and I think they'll eventually die. With I think Taraga, it affects them the same way. I'm not certain. Atoa, if they lose their mask, they're really weak, but they can still survive.
Mm.
And they obviously, of course, cannot utilize any power without a mask like that. As we had talked about before, they provide supplemental powers on top of the elemental powers for Toa specifically. So there are other beings that utilize powered masks that don't have an element like a Toa. Like for example, we already talked about, but like with these guys, like right there with Kopaka, the first mask he collects is one that's X-ray vision, so he can see through like anything.
So what you're telling me is that Bane from Batman is a Bionicle?
He was born to them.
What would happen if I took that mask off? Extremely painful.
I would fucking die.
You're a big guy. For you. It's one of my favorite lines in the whole thing.
So like just in front of us, Kopaka, the very first mask he finds is X-ray vision. Tahu wears the Kanohi Howl, which is shielding, which you actually see in the movies when he's on the lava fall, and he creates that little shield that the lava flows over. That comes from his mask. Liwa has the mask of levitation, so not only can he utilize the air to fly, but he also can just straight up levitate. The important thing with those Toans specifically, they had to find that same version of mask, but for themselves. So each mask that they wore, there was a sixth one that they could collect. So that way they could all use the same powers.
Hmm.
And then they eventually got like a golden version of one mask that had every single power and they could activate them whenever. And that was the important thing with mask powers. They had to be activated. They weren't just like running all the time. Like you always had like some elemental power. Their mask had to be turned on, turned off. The only one that didn't super apply to was this mask, the Kanohi Road. This was a little strange. It's about like seeing through anything, but mostly for like lies and any sort of deceit. It could also see through any sort of like mental illusion. So like a genjutsu would not work if you had this mask on. The thing with this one, it was always running. So like you could tell right away if somebody was lying to you if you were wearing this mask without having to
It
like
was a passive effect.
yeah, without yeah. Well, a passive effect to some degree. So like passively, you could always like see through a lie. If somebody was invisible, you could technically see through them. But some things would require like a full activation usage of the power, like to escape a mental illusion, which had to happen in this wearer's mask because Makuta placed him under a mental like prison, but he managed to escape using his mask. There are different types of masks. So yeah, the Matoran they wear powerless masks. You have what are called the noble Kanohi, which are only ever worn by Turaga. This is kind of interesting. Turaga can, and we talked about this before, the Turaga can utilize the same mask powers that they had when they were Toa, but it'd be a much weaker version.
Mm.
Then you have the Great Kanohi, which are worn by Toa. Great Kanohi are not just worn by Toa; they're worn by other powerful individuals throughout the universe. Usually, like the Order of Matanui and the Makuta, they would wear masks. Dark Hunters didn't necessarily wear masks; they had other powers. The Toa Kata Kanohi were unique. That was when the Toa merged together to form these different isolated individuals called Toa Kata. Then they had their own masks on top of that.
I don't know if they ever had mentioned it or went into it canonically, but do the Dark Hunters are they able to survive without their masks?
Didn't go super into it. Well, it seems like anybody that's more powerful than a Matoran or a Taraga could survive without a mask.
Yeah,
They would just become
be in a
weaker.
weakened state.
Yeah, they would just be very weak, but they wouldn't like they wouldn't like die or go to sleep. Kanoe Nuva, which are the Nuva versions of the mask that they had. So you have the regular Kanoe Great, and then you have the Kanoe Nuva, which is even more powerful than the original version. More isolated ones. This only applied to one specific team. There are organic masks. They're fully organic.
For the vegan Toa.
They were worn by the Toa Nika, which are technically the third generation of Toa you're introduced to in terms of like product release.
Mm.
But their masks are really weird, and those masks cannot be worn by anybody other than the Toa Nika. And then you have these really important, isolated. They're called legendary Kanoe.
Legendary Kanoe.
They only mention two specifically, but I think there are more than that. You can replicate a mask of whatever power. Like masks can be created by Matoran, and so they can replicate. You have 1,000 masks of X-ray vision, but there are certain masks that you only have one of. One of them, like right here, very important. This is Vahi, the Mask of Time. This is the Kanoe. I think it's like Avoki, Mask of Light. This one is the most important one. This one it drives the entire main storyline and the entire rescue of Matanoe. This is the Mask Inika, Mask of Life. There is also a Mask of Creation, but that only applies to the revamped Toa or Bionicle. We're not going to go into that. This one is the.
I was just about to ask.
This one I can't remember what it's called, but
It's
that
a
is the
full
mask.
shadowy mask that they
Literally the mask of shadow.
Yeah, yeah.
That's actually what Tyriax looks like. That's his mask. I put it up here just because I'm not sure if they had multiple masks of shadow because it only ever seemed like one individual held the mask of shadow. Or sorry, it could be used interchangeably by different people, but there only ever seemed to be one specific.
And obviously the Matoran aren't making it.
No.
So yeah.
These masks are kind of crazy because not only were they well, short of this one, not only were they like we're not sure where they came from, but if they were to like break or get damaged, the aspect of life that they affect would kind of start to fuck things up. Like for this one, the Mask of Time, it got damaged during the story, and what actually happened was this weird. Its power was starting to seep out, so you would actually start. It would start to distort time wherever its presence was. If it was destroyed, the aspect of time in the Bionicle universe would disappear with it. It became connected to whatever aspect it was. This one actually was really cool because at one point, one of the Toa was threatening to destroy it if he did not get his way. And even the Makuta was like, all right, all right, we're not gonna fuck with time and space like that. So fine, do what you need to do. Just don't fuck the mask up anymore. So like, if the mask of life got destroyed, all life would be destroyed in the
Yeah.
Bionicle universe. That's kind of crazy.
So I mean, they're all endgame basically.
Yeah, these ones specifically. This one it was created by the Great Beings, and it was made specifically to save Matanui in like a sort of like crisis. It was like the end all be all. Like this was his like this is like the adrenaline you stab into his body, like sort of a thing. This will kind of kickstart him to like get back to where he needs to be. These two don't seem to have nearly the effect as the other two, but they are pretty isolated. Especially this one. This one, obviously, we know what happens, but this one was kind of integral to Makuta's plan, and we learned about this before because the Towahaga stole it. And then I just, as we talked about, you have the movies. I just did this quick. They have their order of release, 2004, 2005, blah, 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 but this is their actual chronological order. So, second movie, third movie come first, and then Mask of Life, followed by Legend Reborn. That's actually a chronological order, should you ever choose to follow it that way.
Did they ever go into what happens after the Legend Reborn?
They do.
As
They had a
I-
web. They
as
had a
far as
web
I know.
comic, and then Greg Farshtey created extra supplemental stories past that as well. And then they even created like alternate universe stories as well too, which were kind of crazy. But they just fuck anything up if you're still trying to figure out the main story. And that is Bionicle. That's start to finish with no deep dives whatsoever.
All right, that was a fucking brain blast of a yeah, it was a beast.
Yep.
Tyler had mentioned this actually prior to us recording. He's like, dude, this is gonna be the. I avoided doing this one for a little bit because it's gonna be so much stuff.
Yeah.
I now I understand where
Yeah.
he was coming from.
Yeah.
This is a lot, which is crazy too because
This is me just trying to skim some stuff too without going too deep.
which is crazy too because this comes from the one that you would get at like a toy vault. You know what I mean? It's crazy that they put so much love and effort into just some toys. It's cool, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. We're probably going to go into Bionicle in the future as well.
Like anything else, we're going to do some deep dives, which will
Yeah,
just give
deep
us a greater view, paint a more fuller picture, because this is just a skeleton of the story, just to get you an idea, give you some sort of footing to know what something might be.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. These are packed full episodes. So yeah, let us know how you like it. All right, and we will tune in next time on